Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is a review. And this review is going to look at some of the major characteristics of living organisms. So actually what I want you to do, the first thing is I want you to find somebody to pair up with. So do we have groups of two? Two. Okay, so you guys could be a group of three. Okay, so go find that person that you want to be with. You can introduce yourself to them. And while you do that, what I want you to do is get a piece of paper, and I want you to put both of or all three of your names on a piece of paper, and you're going to hand this in to me. So this is not to be graded, but I just want to put your name on it. You could just have one piece of paper with three names on it. Okay. So I want you to think about what you already know, because you probably already know a lot, right? And so what I want you to do is I want you to start brainstorming with your partner, with your group, about what you would write down as the requirements for life. So what are some of the things that you would need if in order to create or to sustain life or living things? And this could be, this is broader than just humans, right? So you could think about single-celled organisms. You could think about multicellular, like insects, but also humans as animals. So we're just going to spend about 10 minutes, and I want you to just brainstorm that on that piece of paper, what you think the requirements of life are. And then we're going to go and talk about this together. And as you're doing that, I'm going to come around and take roll, because they're requiring me to do so for some odd reason. The federal government wants roll taken.
Okay, definitely. That's true. Yeah. Something to keep all your parts together. Or yeah. Francis. Okay, sleep is important. Sleep value 212. And person. Exercise is good.
Do you remember anything?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably remember a lot of things. And what was and Lincoln. So Hannah is not here. So, can you hear me? Oxygen.
As soon as I handed in.
I'm taking them out. What is that? But
You gotta be kidding me.
yeah.
Touch.
Yeah, I just really want to school. This is technically my fifth year. Yeah, I went to college basketball. Kind of got, didn't really want to do that anymore, so I just started working. This job, that's just, you just gotta keep almost everything. So it's, I'll say never, yeah. So I probably need that time to go and find out. But it'll work itself out. So I do all my sections. Now I take time. Took the EMT class this year a lot. I want to help me to do this. Which is weird. They would think that the first thing that leads first thing I think the way that Paxton is so weird. So my mom actually comes to high school.
Okay. So unfortunately, I can't get the computer to work. So I don't know what's wrong. And this is electric then? Oh my gosh, why did they do this while we're gone? That won't even go up. Oh, gotta be kidding me.
I want the old room back.
Huh?
I want the old room back. Much nicer.
Which old room? The big one?
The biology one.
Oh, the big lecture hall. Yeah. This is bizarre. I think I just hung up for a minute. It's not gonna make the math people happy at all. Okay. So give me your handouts. There's gotta be a button.
And did you send me an email?
No. Mm-mm. And this does not, I can't get this to work. Turn that on. Power off. I want to turn that off.
Yeah.
Okay. Old fashioned life. Okay, so let's see what you wrote. Energy. Okay. Why do we need energy? At this, let's think about it at the cellular level. Since you guys, what is the fundamental currency of energy? ATP. So ATP is the molecule that is used by the cells and also our body to maintain its order, right? And so this is the maintenance, one of the reasons is the maintenance of order, right? Because without energy, things go to a state of disorder, right? So things fall apart. So when you die and you stop producing ATP, your cells will start to fall apart, and then microorganisms will colonize those cells and start to use them for energy, and you'll start the process of decomposition, okay? So the maintenance of order is really important for energy, but we also need energy to grow and to reproduce. Okay. So as we go from a single cell to a multicellular organism, what type of cell division is responsible for growth and development? What type of cell division? Does anybody remember? Mitosis, right? Okay. So I'll put grow and repair, right? So one of the really interesting things about our bodies is that they're constantly, the cells are constantly dying and being replaced. And I was going to show this video that talked about that, but hopefully I'll be able to show that on Wednesday, where we look at the different parts of our body and actually how long they exist before they are completely replaced. So you probably know that your skin is replaced and sloughed off. And so the cells that make up the skin have to undergo cell division, a form of mitosis, in order to replace the skin that is sloughed off. And so when we look at reproduction in terms of humans, this would be meiosis. Okay? And so remember that meiosis is a special type of cell reproduction that produces egg and sperm. And then the egg and the sperm come together to form a new unicellular organism that will then start this process of growth and repair. Okay? So that would take energy, right? So energy is required for that. Okay? Is energy required for anything else that you might have put down? Somebody put it as their number one. What did you put as your number one that might require energy? Movement. Okay. So even single-celled organisms move. Plants move, but at a much less grand scale than animals, right? But we have to move in order to get and acquire energy, right? Because we have to eat other organisms in order to have the energy to grow and reproduce. And so movement, and we can talk about movement of the whole body, but we could also talk about movement of the blood. So the pumping of the blood throughout the body requires energy. Also, the movement of the food through your digestive tract, the peristalsis that occurs in the digestive tract, would require energy, right? So movement is a reason why we need energy. Okay. The other thing about energy that's really interesting is that we lose energy to the environment as heat. So when we have metabolism, and metabolism could be the chemical reactions that occur in your body. So when we convert, say, for example, fats, right, to ATP, which we can do if we run out of carbohydrates, if we run out of glucose, right? We start to burn fat and we can produce energy. But a byproduct of this is heat. And heat is a form of energy that is lost to our environment and that we cannot regain. This is nice. I like this. I like the low profile of it, the ability to move. Okay, what else? Does anybody want to offer up one of the things that they put down on their Water. So I often get, as a reason why we need water is because we are made up of water. But that is kind of a circular arrangement. So the question is then, why are we made up of water? Okay, so we need water. But the reason why is not that we are composed of water. The question is why are we composed of water? And it's really interesting because I just learned last quarter that we start out when we're babies, we're like 70% water. And then by the time we're old people, we're like 45% water, right? So you start to dehydrate as you age, which is kind of interesting. So why would we need water?
Universal solvent.
Universal solvent. Okay, so what that means is that things get dissolved in water. So water pulls substances apart, right? So the water molecule is polar, so water pulls substances apart. And they go into solution. So this is the way we transport most of the substances throughout our body, right? So oxygen is actually transported, part of it's transported in solution, part of it is bound to another molecule, hemoglobin. But hormones are transported in solution, glucose, amino acids, other things are transported in solution, right? So water can cause stuff to go into solution. Okay. Any other reason why we might need water? If you think back on metabolism, water is an important part of metabolism because in order to create molecules or break them apart, water is needed, right? So we have in metabolism, we have hydrolysis. So looking at that word, what do you think that means? Hydro obviously means water, but what does lysis mean? What is a lysosome? Do you remember that from your cell biology? Breaking down, right? So water is usually a molecule that is important in breaking apart covalent bonds. And so we can talk about this is necessary for catabolism. And you'll remember that catabolism is the breaking apart of a molecule. So in order to break sucrose into glucose and fructose, right, we have to have an enzyme, but we also have to have water. So water is necessary for that chemical reaction to take place. Right? We use it to break it apart. Okay. What else did you put down as a requirement for life? Nutrients. Okay, so I would put up here energy. Nutrients is kind of related to this because when we talk about growth and reproduction and repair, that requires certain nutrients. But if we look at some nutrients that actually are not the building blocks, so we'll put building blocks, e.g. an example of this would be like amino acids. What do amino acids make up? Amino acids are the building blocks of what type of molecules? Nope. Starts with a P. Proteins, right? So like if you're an athlete and you want to build muscle mass, like if you're a bodybuilder, sometimes I recommend that you take protein powder, right? And protein powder has all the necessary amino acids that your body could use to build and repair muscle, okay? So those are the amino acids. That would be the building blocks. But we also need, for example, vitamins. And oftentimes vitamins are what we call coenzymes. So vitamins are not the building blocks, but they actually work with the enzymes to help build tissue. Okay. So a good example of this would be the B vitamins, and specifically the B, and I don't know the numbers, the retinol. They actually numbered them and did A, B, C in the order in which they were discovered. So they don't actually make any sense, but it's the B vitamins. And so what is retinol? And actually this is a building block, sorry. But this is an example of a building block. But what is retinol necessary for? Does anybody know? What function of the body? Why do we need retinol? Where is that found in the body? Does anybody know? Eyes, excellent. So retinol is important because we'll talk about this when we get to the structure of the eye, but we have photoreceptors and we need retinol in order to be able to absorb light energy. And so that light energy can be absorbed. And so if you do not have B vitamins in your diet, you could potentially become blind, right? So the carrots, right? The carrot and the rabbit and vision, that's the reason why those are kind of all hooked together. Okay. How about the C, vitamin C? Does anybody know what disease you can get if you have a lack of vitamin C? It's got a name.
Scurvy.
Scurvy, right? And so people on ships, for example, oftentimes had this problem. If they didn't have fresh fruits with vitamin C, they would develop scurvy. And so vitamin C is necessary for a variety of things, but one of the things that it does is it helps with the repair of the skin. And so when you have scurvy, you start to develop sores on the surface of your skin. Okay, so vitamins would be essential nutrients. So yes, we do have a requirement for those nutrients. We also have minerals besides vitamins. So what's an example of a mineral that is a necessary nutrient? Calcium. Anything else? Sodium. What about your thyroid gland? What is the mineral that it needs? Does anybody know? Iodine. So this is why they put iodine in salt. They iodinize the salt because iodine is actually an essential mineral for building thyroxine, which is a hormone that regulates your metabolic rate in your body. Okay. Okay, so what did somebody else put besides energy, nutrients, and water? Oxygen. Okay. So some people, when I ask them why we need oxygen, they might put, because we breathe, right? But the reason why we breathe is because we need oxygen. So that's not really a good explanation for why we need oxygen. And so I know, you might have learned about the aerobic respiration at the cellular level in the mitochondria, which is referred to as the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And that is used to produce ATP. But for our purposes this quarter, right, for oxygen, we just need to know that we have what is referred to as aerobic respiration. Now, some organisms need oxygen, other organisms do not. So for example, we have some anaerobic bacteria that live on this planet that do not require oxygen. And oxygen was not abundant in our atmosphere at the beginning of life on this planet. And then it was the living organisms that produced oxygen that then allowed new organisms to evolve to use oxygen. And so not all living organisms need oxygen. And so this is the idea that we can take glucose, right? We can combine it with oxygen, and we can also combine it with water. And then as a byproduct, we get carbon dioxide. Actually, we don't need water here, sorry. We get carbon dioxide plus H2O plus ATP. Not on the wrong side. Okay, so this takes place in the mitochondria. And so we are going to be talking about this a lot next quarter, because we are going to be talking about skeletal muscle and heart muscle, and we're going to be talking about the difference between glycolytic fibers and oxidative fibers. And so we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about aerobic respiration in terms of muscle use. And so muscle cells can have lots of mitochondria if they are using aerobic respiration. So remember, this takes place in the mitochondria. Okay, let's see what else is here. Okay. Stable environments. Somebody wrote. So one of the things about our environment is that it is relatively stable, but our outside environment is more unstable than our internal environment. So if you think about temperature, our internal environment, temperature-wise, stays pretty constant. Even if we're outside and it's 0 degrees, we still stay a pretty consistent, constant temperature. And so we could talk about this as the internal environment. And this is what is known as homeostasis. And this term was coined quite a while ago, and it literally means same state, right? So this means that we constantly stay the same state. So this doesn't actually describe what we now know about our physiology, our internal environment, as well as what may be described as the dynamic equilibrium. Okay, so when you think about this, equilibrium is kind of a relative constant, but it can fluctuate around that constant. So as for homeostasis might be like a straight line. Dynamic equilibrium means that it oscillates, right? So for example, if I'm running up and down the stairs, my heart rate goes up. If I'm laying in bed, my heart rate goes down, right? So I can adjust according to the environment, right? So that is a really important requirement for life. Some organisms, like if you think about a jellyfish is in ocean water, and its internal salt concentration is exactly the same as the ocean water. So if the ocean water becomes more concentrated and more salty, its internal environment becomes more salty. And so that means that their internal environment is going to fluctuate with the external environment. If you think about snakes, right? Snakes can become really cold when it's cold outside. And then they can also become really hot when it is warm outside, and maybe if they're sunbathing. And so their internal environment might fluctuate a little bit more than ours does. Okay. So that's the stable environment. Okay, does anybody want to add anything to this? What is pressure? What was meant by pressure? Atmospheric pressure. Okay. So I went to Santa Fe last summer, and it's 7,000 feet compared to what, like 1,000 feet here. And so the atmospheric pressure was less up there, right? Because I was up high. And so there was actually less oxygen available. And so you could actually walk down the street and they had oxygen bars, right? So you could go in to get your little dose of oxygen if you were feeling like lightheaded and dizzy, right? And if you climb a mountain, you can actually become violently ill and actually die if you climb too rapidly and you don't pay attention to how you are feeling. So you can get sick from altitude sickness, right? Which can actually make you die if you're not careful. And so when we look at the atmospheric pressure, one of the reasons why it is so important is because it describes or it aids in the diffusion of gases. So the gases in our body include oxygen and CO2. So both of these substances actually have to be in solution in order for them to move across the surface of a membrane, right? So these are in solution as they move across the surface of a membrane. And they move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. And when we're talking about gases, the concentration has to do with their pressure. So they move from a higher pressure, we'll just put higher pressure, to a lower pressure. So if I am way up high in the mountain and there's less oxygen, it is not going to diffuse as rapidly into my circulatory system as I am used to. And I might not have enough hemoglobin, so that I might be kind of lacking in hemoglobin. People that live at high altitudes have more hemoglobin, have more red blood cells, which actually aids in their ability to transport and carry oxygen. And that's why people sometimes will, if they're an athlete, they'll sometimes train in Denver to compete in LA, right? They train at Denver and they get extra hemoglobin, extra red blood cells, and then they go to LA and they can compete more readily because they're able to obtain more oxygen more quickly than a person who didn't have that experience, okay? So atmospheric pressure is important. Okay, sleep is a really interesting one. This one is not in your book, but somebody wrote that down. Does anybody, yeah?
For the atmospheric pressure, when it comes to planes, like how does that work? Because
they pressurize the cabin.
Okay.
So they give you air.
But you can still get altitude sickness from that too. Like people that fly once or twice a week for work, you know, they go to the doctor fairly often. And altitude sickness is a pretty intense thing if you're flying a lot.
Right. And it also can be if you go down to the ocean, right, where the pressure is greater, you have to be very careful about coming back up.
Especially if you're from a place like higher, like Colorado, Montana, higher elevation places.
Diving is worse or flying is worse?
Well, either or.
Okay.
Like flying is not very fun. I grew up in a town where we were at almost 6,000 feet. We were pretty high up there, and then I went to school in Missouri, and that's like 2,000 feet. And it would, when you're flying back and forth, it's not like bad. You just feel like you're coming down with a cold or something.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Okay, does anybody know the most recent idea about why sleep is essential? Because, go ahead.
I was just emphasizing when your body needs rest.
Rest. But why do we have to go to sleep? I mean, we could just lay in bed, but laying in bed is not the same thing as sleeping, right? We all know that because of insomnia. They can rest your muscles and you're like, does anybody? They have a new hypothesis. So there's lots of different hypotheses, but this new hypothesis is the idea that when we sleep, the spaces between the cells in the tissues of our brain open up, and it's a way that we get rid of waste products. So we get rid of waste buildup in the nervous tissue in the brain. That's the new hypothesis about it. Also aids in memory, right? But people who cannot sleep, there's actually a genetic disease that has a late onset and is called familial insomnia, which is when you're like 40, all of a sudden you are having trouble sleeping, and then you might just be able to, you stop sleeping entirely. And these people, when you give them sleep pills, it just makes their symptoms worse. And they actually die after about a year of inability to sleep. So if you don't sleep, you die in terms of humans. And even, even fish sleep. And is it dolphins that can actually, one side of their brain sleeps while the other one is active, and then they switch it. So they only sleep with half of their brain at a time or something like that, which is really cool.
My whole brain.
Yeah, my brain should sleep. But memory is important too. Okay, this looks good. Okay, so I am going to hand out a worksheet, which you can do on your own. So this is a worksheet, and this is going to review some terminology about orientation. So body parts relative to one another. And then the back part is kind of an introduction to tissues. And so what I would like you to do is to take this home, and through the use of your first chapter in your book, I would like you to fill it out and then bring it back to me on, actually you don't have to bring it back. This will be a good review for this information, and this information could appear on the first quiz. So you want to keep this to study. Okay. So let's just review orientation for a second here. And we can also at the same time review bones and anatomical regions. Okay, so I'm just going to point to a part of my body, and you're going to tell me what it is. And then I'll point to another part of my body, you can tell me what it is, and then we'll talk about the relationship between the two, okay? So what is this region right here called? Cervical, right? What is this region, the center of my breast, called? What is this bone called? It is the center, sternum, right? So this is the sternum. This is the cervical vertebrae, right? So my cervical vertebrae are what compared to my sternum? Superior, right? So they're above. So my cervical vertebrae are superior to my sternum. Does anybody know what the ribs are called? What that region is called? Abdominal. I was looking for, well, let's skip over that one, sorry. What am I talking about? Ribs. Okay. How about this part right here? The shoulder. Does anybody remember what that part, the tip of my shoulder, is called? It starts with an A. This is called acromial, right? And the reason why it's called acromial is that there's a process off of the scapula that is called the acromial process, okay? So then the acromial process is what compared to my brachial? Acromial. Now this is the appendicular skeleton. And so remember that we use special words on the appendicular skeleton. So is it distal or proximal? Proximal, right? So my shoulder would be proximal compared to my upper arm bone, which is the humerus. So the acromial region is proximal. When I look at my carpals, right, compared to my brachial region, they would be distal, right? So they're further away. So with the appendicular skeleton, the arms and the legs, we use proximal and distal instead of superior and inferior. In the axial region, we use superior and inferior. Okay, so if you think about our internal body, and if you think about what is right here, and I'm feeling like the rings, what is that organ called? Trachea, right? So this is my trachea. And then my esophagus is behind my trachea. So the esophagus is part of the digestive tract. So what would be my trachea compared to my esophagus? My trachea is what compared to the esophagus? Anterior, right? So this is kind of weird. When we think about animals that are on all fours, right? It's much easier to think about posterior, anterior. So if I'm walking around on all fours, anterior is my head end, right? So this is my anterior, this is my posterior. But since I'm standing up, my anterior is my part of the body that comes into the environment first, and since I'm not on fours, it's my whole body, right? And the posterior is the back. But if you think about a dog, for example, their anterior and posterior is different than their belly and their back, right? So their belly is called their ventral region, and their back would be their dorsal region. So you can also say in me that this is my anterior or ventral side, and this is my posterior or dorsal side. And so we can say that my trachea is anterior or ventral to my esophagus. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Okay. So if you would review chapter 1, there is a diagram that has all of the anatomical terminology in it. That will be very helpful for when we start getting to learning the skeletal system. The other thing that we're going to go over this week is going to be the tissues. And so on your handout, you also, I think I handed them all out. On your handout on the back is a brief, just kind of a review of some of the tissue types that you might have learned about in cell biology or general biology. And so if you could review just those major kinds of tissues and how they might function. So on Wednesday, we'll start talking about epithelial tissues and skeletal tissue and connective tissue in more detail. And hopefully by then I'll have all of this technology figured out, like how to raise and lower the screen. Okay, are there any questions? So that handout is not for a grade, but rather it's just for your own purpose, right? To help you better study and prepare for the quiz on Wednesday and the midterm. Okay, I think that is it. We'll end a little early today. All my tech services people.
Say,
Yes.
okay.
Yep. So yeah, so posterior is the back of the body. So this is also ventral. So anterior is the same thing as ventral, and posterior is the same thing as dorsal in humans, but not in dogs or other animals that are on all fours.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. So are we doing anything on the 29th?
I looked and it's just
It's just a lecture.
yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know if you had Also, there was a quiz and then.
Okay, just let me know ahead, like before you leave, if there is a quiz, we'll make sure we
To
can.
tell you on Friday.
Yeah, okay.